to Steve Small Engine Saloon again, guys. Thanks for coming back. I've wanted to do this video for a long time now. This is a basic tune-up on one of these Stihl power heads. The reason I chose this power head, this unit, to do this video is because these things come on curved shaft weed eaters, straight shaft weed eaters, the combi units, the split shaft ones, even the little Stihl MM55 Yardboss rototiller. There's got to be millions of these things out there. Parts you're going to need: spark plug, air filter, fuel filter. Tools you're going to need: spark plug wrench to get the spark plug out. If you don't have a spark plug wrench, you're going to need to get hopefully you'll have a 19 millimeter or a 3/4 inch deep socket. It has to be a deep socket to get that spark plug out. Needle nose pliers, if you have some. It's going to help in at least 2 different cases here. Get the carburetor off. Here's your biggest challenge right here. You have to have either a 5/16 or an 8 millimeter socket to get those 2 nuts off to get your carburetor off. Has to be a 1/4 inch drive. It has to be a small socket to get in there to get those nuts off. It's hot outside. I thought it'd be appropriate to have a Killer Budweiser go today. Before we start the tune-up, I got to emphasize that a tune-up on something like this is pretty much general maintenance. Your unit runs okay, you just want to maintain it. That's a general tune-up on something like this. Why am I taking the carburetor off to do this? Part of a tune-up is checking or replacing your fuel filter. You can see on this power head right here how tall this fuel tank is. The fuel line and the fuel filter on the end of it in here is not as tall as this is. It is impossible to fish that out the top so you can take your fuel filter off here. You have to take the carburetor off to check your fuel filter, and underneath the carburetor you pull the whole fuel line out of the top of the fuel tank to check it. Unfortunately, that's the only way you can do that on this model. Okay, so step number 1, let's change that spark plug. Pull that boot off. You got to hold that out of the way. Spark plug wrench, loosen that off. Pull that old plug out. New plug. I am going to use an NGK plug today. It's a BPM R7A. If you want to use a Bosch spark plug, the equivalent is a WSR6F. If you want to use a Champion spark plug, the equivalent is an RCJ6Y. Now the manufacturers tell you this: you put that spark plug in there until it's finger tight, till the gasket actually is making contact, finger tight, and then you take your spark plug wrench and you turn that another half a turn. Just tighten it up till it's snug. That's all you got to do. Pop that plug back on. You're going to hear that little spring connector in there. As you push it down, it goes zip. Spark plug's done. Okay, step number 2, we got to get that carburetor off of there. Get your air filter cover off. Air filter cover, air filter out. And you're going to see those 2 nuts buried way down in there. 5/16, 8 millimeter, small 1/4 inch drive here. Get those nuts off. You're going to have to push that in still even tight with a 1/4 inch drive till it contacts that nut. Get those nuts off. Pull that air filter housing off of there. Now we're left with the carburetor right there. Before we can actually pull that carburetor off of there, we need to disconnect 2 fuel lines, and the throttle cable. Throttle cable's easy. Here's how you do it. Look in there and just push down on this lever with your finger right here. And that thing's probably going to pop out all on its own if you're not pulling the trigger. Throttle cable's off. Before you pull these fuel lines off of the carburetor itself, little tip here, if you don't release the pressure in the tank, turn your cap off a little bit to release the pressure. If that tank has pressure in it, you pull those fuel lines off, you're going to get squirted right in the face. Also check your fuel level. If your fuel level is way up the neck here, when you pull these lines off, gravity is just going to shoot that out anyways. Make sure you dump a little bit of gas out if it's too full. Get your level of your gas down about halfway down the tank. Needle nose pliers, right there, comes in handy. Get those fuel lines off. Pull them off like that. Now you got that taken off, throttle cable taken off, and the carburetor slips right off in your hand like that. Now this is where you need to check your fuel filter. Here's step number 3, checking your fuel filter. Again, needle nose pliers are your best friend here. Get in there with your needle nose pliers, grab that thing, and you just gently pull this out so that whole grommet pulls out of the fuel tank. And now that whole assembly comes out of the top of the tank, and now you can see your fuel filter. Okay, so now you got your fuel line assembly, fuel filter assembly out. Change that fuel filter, you just pull that right off of there. You can check that if you want, blow that out with some air if you want, and then suck through it, blow through it, see if it's actually restricted or not. You don't want to get a mouthful of gas. Just put a new one on, they're cheap. Part number for that is 0000350350 Is that what it says down there? 0000350350 Yeah, that's it. We're going to pop that back in. Now you can see how there's 2 lines coming out the top. One's longer than the other one. Okay, this is important for putting this back in. There is a right way and a wrong way to actually put this back in your fuel tank. We're going to slip that back in there, fuel filter down into the tank. We want the longest fuel line right here towards the engine. Directly towards the engine, and the shortest one is going to be towards you. Push that back down in the tank, and yes, a little tiny screwdriver is going to help you get that back down in there. You can do it without it, but if you got a little tiny screwdriver, shove that back down in there, and it pops right back into the fuel tank. Now, these fuel lines go on a specific way. Slide that carburetor back on the way you took it off, and this is how these fuel lines are from the factory. I'll show you as clear as I can here. You take that longest fuel line out, the one that was closest to the engine, and you put that on the top connector. The next one kind of wraps around it like this. I'm going to try to get a video here as clear as I can. I hope that's clear. That one goes on like that. It kind of loops around that little accordion style lower line, wraps around that one like that. That's the way they come from the factory. That's the way you should put it back together. That's the way no lines are going to actually get pinched and kinked in there. Your throttle cable back on. This is a little bit of a bitch to do. Hold that lever down with one finger like that, and needle nose pliers again are going to really help in this situation. Hold that lever down. You'll see that where the throttle cable connects in. One side is a big side hole. You see that? It's bigger. We spin that around and it's a smaller hole on that side. That's for this little grommet thing on the end of your throttle cable needs to fit in properly. So you have to have that little connector on your carburetor spun around the right direction. The biggest hole goes down so that grommet will fit in there. Before we put this together, here's another little thing. You can also use a little flat screwdriver. Proper thing you're going to need is actually a Torx 25 tool. What you want to do is look at that now that you got the throttle cable hooked up. Squeeze your trigger and you'll see where the throttle lever is going down all the way to the stop. Sometimes you'll pull this and the throttle cable has stretched enough where when you pull that trigger all the way down, it kind of stops like right there. It's not going down all the way down. That's what this little screw in the top is for. Right there. You take your little screwdriver or your Torx, which you should use, squeeze the trigger down all the way, and then turn that in until you see that throttle lever hits the stop. Now you got wide open throttle there. That's an adjustment there to compensate for when your throttle cable is stretching. You can adjust that to make it always go wide open throttle. Do everything in the reverse order. Put your fuel or your air filter housing back on. Snug those nuts back up nice and snug again. Now you're ready to put the air filter back on. Air filter part number is 4140-124-2800. Put that back on. Snap your cover back on there. Okay, so there's your basic tune-up on one of these power heads. Hope I helped you guys out again. A little subscribe button down here. Hit that like button. If your unit's not running properly, I have other videos on my channel to address that situation, but this was just a basic tune-up. Steve out.
Yeah.